6 a.m. Tuesday. Troy Pike had water on it, but at least it wasn't very deep. Behind him, in the wagon bed, James Porter could hear his wife and children singing. He recognized the tune as a hymn, but didn't know the words. The pain in his chest had come again, and this time it stayed. A dull, throbbing ache filled his left side, and his legs seemed to have gone to sleep. He hunched down miserably, as much to make himself a smaller target for the persistent rain as to prevent the chest pain from worsening. He wished now that he had left the cows behind. They had badly slowed the wagon's progress. Even in those two high areas where the road had been free of water, their progress had been slow, and Tom and Belle had been forced to work harder than they should have. He wished he could stop and rest them, but didn't dare. He breathed a little easier when the roughly paved road turned to brick, indicating they were entering North Dayton. Belle's hooves momentarily slid from beneath her, and she thrashed frantically to regain her footing. Ahead, the water looked even deeper, and Porter wondered if they'd make it to Uncle Ermin's house near Valley Pike. He remembered how his uncle had told stories about the flood of 1866 and how the water had surged about their house to a depth of 6 feet, but the horse was big and well built and safe. I'm sorry, the house was big and well built and safe. He had often told them to come to his house for safety at the first sign of high water. Far in the distance, a whistle blew, then another, still a third. A church bell clanged noisily not far away, in the gray light of dawn smudging the sky. Porter noted the streets were almost empty. Far down Troy Pike, toward Valley Street, he saw two horsemen surge across the street and disappear. As his own wagon crossed the intersection of Leo Street, he saw another horse with two riders in the east, belly deep. Harold poked his head from under the covers. "Listen to the whistles and bells, Pa," he said. "They must be warning people that—" "Pa!" Porter spun around at the sudden terror in his son's voice. A paralyzing chill struck him as he saw what had frightened Harold. A huge, foaming wave headed toward them from several hundred yards behind. It was about 4 feet high. A similar and only slightly smaller wave was coming from the west on Leo. "Yeah!" He slashed the reins across the horses' rumps, and the animals plunged forward, sliding and stumbling. They didn't have a chance. Before they'd gone 30 feet, the wave from behind hit them, sweeping both cows from their feet and dragging them around toward the front. The wagon turned broadside to the current, and the two upstream wheels lifted high. For an agonizing moment, it balanced there as Porter fought to control it, dimly hearing the screams of the girls behind him. Then the wave from Leo Street hit them, and the wagon turned turtle. The tongue snapped, and the traces pulled loose, freeing the horses. Porter was catapulted far into the rampaging current, and even as he hit the icy water, he felt the incredibly sharp pain burst into chest. He lost consciousness before he could fight his way to the surface. Under the overturned wagon, the children seized one another in their panic, hanging on desperately, even as their breaths exploded from them with the shock of the frigid water. inextric- inextricably tangled with one another, and with the blankets wrapped about them besides. They had no chance, and their struggles quickly ceased. Ida Porter had started to get to her feet when Harold shouted his warning, and when the wagon pitched over, she was thrown out and landed between the two cows. And as one of them tossed its head frantically, its short horn caught her shoulder and tore it open to the bone. A hoof slammed into the small of her back, thrusting her under the water, but she fought her way back and broke surface 30 feet from the wagon, which bobbed along with its wheels in the air. A board hissed through the water and slapped her face, a stunning blow, gouging her cheek, yet she managed to keep her head up, floating helplessly with the powerful current. She struck a tree, tried to hold on, but was bounced back into the current. Her left side bumped agonizingly into a metal hitching post beneath the surface, and she felt something tear inside her. But there was no pain, and vaguely she wondered why. The wagon had lodged against a picket fence far behind her, but she did not know it. For a short while, her world was a queer one, disassociated, dissociated from physical sensation, her mind withdrawn from her body, somehow trying to realize that this chip of life being carried along was her own. The current whirled her to a storefront, thrust her partially through the jagged remains of a big plate glass window, and then pulled her out again. The right side of her head in front of her ear, from scalp line to neck, was laid open and turned the dirty water to russet nearby. A telephone pole jutted from the water ahead, and as she swept into it, her right arm managed to crook around a foot spike. She dangled there a little while as the water tugged to pull her free, and when unable to do so by itself, performed the job with an implement. A slope-roofed outhouse came bobbing swiftly along and smashed to flinders against the pole, breaking her arm as well as her hold. She was now afloat again, already nearly a half-mile from the wagon overturned, still alive in some miraculous fashion, still aware in some deep recess of her mind that somehow she must get herself out of the water. But then, as she was swept across the intersection of Light Street, an eddy caught her and whirled her bodily into a brick wall of a building, and she sank. Her body continued to tumble under the water until her legs became tangled in a broken electric wire, and she thudded heavily into the wall of a big white house at 206 Troy Pike. The current pinned her snugly under the porch eave. An elderly man and woman in the upper front bedroom heard the noise of her striking and looked at one another. "What was that, the woman asked. "Just some floatin' debris hitting the house, I reckon," he answered. He walked to the window and looked out again at the chilling sight of the water rushing past. 6, 7 feet deep out there already. He shook his head. "Reckon they's no chance of Jim and his family getting here now."